Okay, thank you. That was great. I'll just say a few things kind of by way of to engage. I really appreciate the emphasis on context and sort of, I guess, like sedimented histories and how important that is, and the spaces in which we do our work is so important. And also thinking about that as a kind of sort of matter of discourse or even material texts. I mean, I do think that one big context here would be our disciplinary difference, right? Which is to say, you know, queer studies is really out there, and you know, the unsaid is definitely in those acknowledgments. Read those queer theory books; those acknowledgments say lots of crazy stuff is in there. So, you know, that really pushes it. But also, I think, you know, I just come from the kind of hardcore humanities where things like affect, embodiment, narrative, a kind of you know, catachrestic logic, like all of those things are kind of normative actually, and what is challenging in that context is actually to want to have any kind of access to, you know, the empirical is just a bad word for people in my field. So, and I see this work that I'm doing as basically sort of context based. That's to say, if I lived in a world where, you know, everybody's just telling me to do statistical studies, then I would be arguing for affect, but that's not the world I live in. I live in the world sort of upside down from that. So I think context is very important here. Kind of following in that, I love the kind of idea of the crap sellers method. I think that's great. I think, again, for me, it's sort of like once you take crap selling and call it method, what kind of difference does that make, right? Which is to say, what kind of lingering attachments do we have to things like, just like rigor, right? Which is to say, you know, among crap sellers, some people are kind of bad at their job and some people are really good at their job, right? And so, you know, again, along with the empirical method itself is a kind of non-starter in my field. The idea that you would actually have a kind of teachable, repeatable system for doing your work, you know, again, and I think it ends up being kind of, you know, some of the problems around kind of the exceptional figure, right? The sort of genius theorist, or the kind of problems about the elitism of literary studies, right? Because there are no methods that can be taught. It's all about the feel for the game. So I think, you know, crap selling as method is a kind of contradiction, and how would we work through that kind of tension? And that's really what I'm interested in. Again, coming from a field where there is no such thing as data in literary studies, right? Or there is no method. So then I also wanted to just, I was really glad that you kind of mentioned Leviathan and the air pump, and also Latour's early work. I mean, I've been really interested in late Latour, recent Latour, where, you know, part of what he's saying is that he feels like the kind of critique of facts has been taken up in a way that is at odds with the work that he was doing and wants to do, right? And so, in a way, the kind of, you know, this incredibly meticulous, you know, and really there's where method comes in, this incredibly meticulous ethnography of the laboratory wasn't meant to say there are no such thing as facts, right?
Yeah,
it was actually...
His recent work is criticizing that, that's for sure.
Right, and so it's like facts are actually hard to make, right? And, you know, and his big example is always climate change, right? Is that we actually need facts, and that the sort of, you know, the social construction paradigm has had these problems that have come up. So I'm very interested in Latour and his kind of, the way he's bringing together that sort of critical analysis of the making of knowledge with an insistence on positive knowledge, you know, and I mean, using a lot of language that you would probably hate about, you know, we need to like work on making accounts of what the real world is really like. I mean, that's probably not the Latour that you like, but I think it's very, that sort of dynamic between early and late Latour is quite interesting in this regard. And just to say, I mean, I think this is, again, just to kind of come back to context, and then maybe I'll stop, but I think, again, this is so much about discipline being a sort of discipline-specific thing, and it's interesting to me that a lot of the work that's produced, say, in science studies or in anthropology, for instance, gets taken up in like cultural studies or literary studies or queer studies, but it's taken up out of context in a sense, right? So, you know, I was just doing all this work on Geertz because I've been really interested in thick and thin description, and you get to the end of the thick description essay, which, you know, literary critics have cited very selectively to say, oh, Geertz thinks that, you know, doing ethnography is like reading over the shoulder of your informants, that it's a textual practice. This is great. I do ethnography too. We're all like textual critics. But at the end, he has this polemic against like, what if this becomes a purely aesthetic practice and we're just, you know, looking at text and we're not out there facing the hard realities of the field? You know, again, it's like Latour wasn't saying like there's no such thing as facts. He was in the laboratory for years, you know, trying to figure out how facts are made. So I think, again, it's sort of from my perspective, it's like how do these theories, which seem to be about questioning everything, I'll just, you know, say that, get taken out of context where there actually are commitments that are both kind of institutional contexts of domination, but are also about kind of respect for the object and investment in material practice and so on, extracted from that and turned into a kind of dogma that I don't think is really doing us a lot of good at this point. So that's kind of what I'm speaking back to. But again, I think context is like the crucial thing here to talk about. So,
thank you. That's really great. Now, I just immediately to engage with some of what you've been saying, I'm just thinking in anthropology there is also a celebratory mode that after writing culture, you know, in fact, we have just rid ourselves of, you know, some of the entrenched, institutionalized, the structural racism, and as if in our institutions, after the critique of colonialism in anthropology, we have moved on, you know, in a sense.